Right, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about what I've got here today. And really what I'm going to share today is the outcome of a 2-year program that we've been working on, specifically on development of packaging for export produce. And I guess there's a number of components to what the learnings are from this. Initially, it was more about the supply chain analysis. So I guess there was the recognition in the company that we understood well what to do with packaging at a farm level, but what was happening further down the supply chain, particularly at the end of the export leg in Asia. So the decision was really made to really dig into that and use that to drive what we were doing from a technical perspective in how we measured performance of packaging and also how we designed the packaging. During that analysis, we have learned some things around branding, which I'll go into briefly. I know there's some other speakers talking specifically about branding. And then I'll talk more specifically about the tools that we've developed as part of the technical program and how we've actually generated some packaging improvements for the export. So we'll start with the supply chain. And if you look, there's, I guess, 2 components to it. There's the top part, which we're all familiar with, which is the traditional, I guess, domestic part of the supply chain. So picking in field, packing into the boxes, into the farm cool rooms, palletising, and then into the container, and then to the actual port. And at some point, there's usually some kind of aqueous and trade inspection done on the produce. In terms of what we've done in better understanding, our focus has been around the field practices. So how is the box erected in field? Is it a hand erect? Is it going through a packing shed with machine erection? And also digging into what happened when the product is actually palletised and cooled, and really developing some tools to better understand the thermal behaviour of the packaging. So how does the produce cool? How evenly does it cool across the pallet? And then what happens once it's in the container? And then through the rest of the supply chain. So I guess from our focus from a design perspective has been around here. But also in the last 12 months, we've also looked at what goes on at the other end. So going into Asia and understanding what's happening at the other end of the supply chain. I guess our view is there's 3 distinct styles of supply chain at the export end. So there's the traditional clearance through the port, and then through the traditional wholesale market, local resellers, and then finally the retailers. There's also the other path through the wholesaler DCs. So I guess this is more in line with our experience in Australia, where you go into a large DC and that thing is distributed directly into the retailers. And then the final area, which someone has mentioned this morning, is around the growth of e-commerce, where you're going direct from wholesaler to consumer via some kind of e-commerce platform. And really, from a packaging perspective, these are not the same. So I guess traditionally same box may have gone into the container, but how they behave through each of these supply chains is different, and that drives the requirements differently for how we make and supply a package into each of those supply chains. So just to summarise from a supply chain, so I guess our view now is, particularly after this 2-year program, is that we need to change how we do our design for the packaging and really understand what is the, what is the specific path. Is it container to DC to retailer, or is it through a wholesale path via some kind of redistribution and then finally to the retailer? And I think from a corrugated perspective, our biggest challenge is the exposure to humidity and temperature. And this is what's driven some of the thermal techniques that we've been working on, because ultimately what happens to the packaging at the end of the supply chain is really dominated by this humidity and temperature exposure. And really we can get through the to the path to the domestic port, okay, but it's really what happens at the other end which determines how does the box look and how is the produce perceived in the end market. So I'll just run you through a couple of quick slides just to show you the sorts of things that we've seen, which have in turn been used to drive what we're doing from a technical perspective. So look, I guess starting at the high end, there's the air freight or container via ship. into a DC and direct to retailer. So very controlled supply chain. And I guess for us as a packaging manufacturer, there is a short exposure to the product, and it's relatively gentle on the packaging, particularly the corrugated packaging. If you then move into the wholesale markets, the normal path would be from a refrigerated container into the market, either into a cool store in market or direct onto floor to be sold at the wholesale market level. And typically the product's being exposed to up to 8 hours to the external environment. But not all wholesale markets are the same. So this is photos of the market in Kowloon. And this is different to some of the other markets that we saw. So initially, yes, the product is coming out of a container or alternatively a truck from a cool store, but it's actually downloaded onto the road. So this starts maybe 8, 9 p.m. at night. So the product's actually sitting on the road for several hours until it's transported into the cool rooms within the market for sale the next morning. So even before it's hit the market, we have a significant time where the product's being exposed to moisture. We then go into the daytime sale in Kowloon. So as I mentioned, it's unloaded at night, it's on the ground, but now we're talking about 12 to 16 hours exposure for the packaging before it's on sold. So it is more challenging from a packaging perspective. Then we go into probably the toughest scenario. And these are photos from some of the China distribution in Guangzhou and Shanghai. So it's sold off the floor, but it's going into unrefrigerated swing side trucks, which then go out to the retailers. Alternatively, it's going into an uncontrolled store where it's repacked and broken down. Or probably worst case, it's loose packed into small trucks and then sent out to the retailers. So this, from a packaging perspective, is very, very demanding because you could have 1-2 days exposure to an uncontrolled environment before the boxes actually hit the final retailer. So I guess that's the supply chain part, and I'll explain what we're doing from a technical perspective in a minute. But I'd like to make a couple of comments around the branding, and this is, I guess, things that we've got back from discussions with the wholesalers during some of the supply chain trips. And I think people have already said, within Asia, Australia is recognised as a quality supplier, but equally important as a safe supplier. I mean, with some of the food scares that have been happening in China, there is a lot of attention now to the safety aspects of the food. The other interesting thing was talking to some of the wholesalers. These wholesalers have been to the regional farms, they know specific growers, and they understand about brands and the names of specific farms. So it's not like it's just coming through a big DC. They know very well, they've been there physically visiting the farms, and this is also around the style of business where they want to deal directly with the grower and establish the working and the business relationship. So brands are definitely recognised. The other comment is around, which is an interesting one, is around visual branding. And what I mean by visual branding is 3 things. It's about logos, it's about brand name, and it's also about colour. So if we look at a couple of examples here, I mean, this one's an interesting one. These guys have cut to the chase, they've branded their food as safe. So probably good luck more than anything that they're actually a South African fruit export. But what do you see when you're on the market? You see a big safe on every carton, which ties in well, I guess, with some of the food concerns. But what the customers are really saying was, when you're in the market, it's about visual recognition of the product. So if you look at some of the examples in the middle, black dragon box, which is how they would refer to it, or the white tiger. And this is the sort of language that's being used at the wholesale market level. So they want to be able to see the brand very clearly without necessarily having to read the text or look at the trade stamps to work out where the boxes come from. So very important at a wholesale market level. Another more subtle thing that we saw was these 2 pallets here are both out of New Zealand apples. But look at the presentation of the pallets. So strapped, corner angles, and those pallets on the floor through, I think, five days across 8 different wholesale markets that we went through. Every time the apples were outstanding on the floor. So we saw US citrus cartons that were sagging, but without without fail, these boxes look fantastic, regardless of which market and regardless of which environment they were sitting in from an external exposure. So it's not just about the imaging, it's about the appearance of the pallet, because that's what the wholesalers are looking at when the product's coming out of the containers into the markets. The other reason why visual is at a distance is important, because this is typical of the sales through Guangzhou. So you can see, several hundred buyers on the floor, and they're bringing in containers one after the other through the crowd, lining them up the end, opening the doors and selling the containers directly. So the whole container would go out, or the container would be broken down within the wholesale market. But again, that's your first appearance in the market. As they open the doors, there's your brand lined up down your pallets out into this crowd of buyers. So this is, again, what the wholesaler was saying. It's all about the visual, quick recognition of your product, because your product and your brand is what's selling the produce in some of these markets. Another couple of comments around premiumisation. There is a certain segment of the market where they spend considerable amounts of money on high-end litho packaging. We've got a very good example this year with one of our Tasmanian cherry growers, where he made the decision to go into the high-end graphics for his boxes. He gained an extra $500,000 worth of sales this season by doing that. So yes, there's a cost with the packaging, but if your product quality is in that sort of segment and you're targeting that premium segment, clearly the packaging can help with presenting that brand and supporting the quality perception of your product. But I mean, look at it, looks fantastic. It makes you want to pick up and buy the fruit. And when you're walking through the market, you've got saggy old boxes from perhaps California versus some of these products. It helps make the impression that Australia has got quality fruit. The other trend that we saw very clear, and I think that's already been mentioned this morning, is around the move into prepackaged product. So we saw a lot of pre-packed fruit. From our perspective, from a packaging, if we're using this sort of package or pre-packaged fruit versus loose fill, it changes what we need to do from a packaging perspective from cooling. I'll explain how that works in a minute. The other trend we saw was clearly around the fresh cut and processed products. So if you look here, this is the sort of product that was being sold in some of the premium supermarkets, which I think Cynthia mentioned in her presentation this morning. There's a very clear segment around premium stores with the people that can afford to buy that sort of fruit. And again, depending where you want to target your product, do you want to go into the bulk volume where you compete against the Chinese growers, or do you want to move into this more premiumisation of the product? And to me personally, this is where the opportunity is for Australia, because it's the quality, it's the price, and it's the positioning into the higher end where people will pay for the quality. So now I'll talk specifically about, I guess, my part around the technical development. So I guess there's two reasons why we started this program. Firstly, for us internally, it was about speed to market. So when we create new packaging designs, traditional way is we'd go out into the farm, we'd pack boxes, we'd come back in a week, and we'd have a look at the performance of the boxes. So the suggestion was, is there a better way that we can do this so that we can screen designs, try different formats? If customers are putting in, punnetised product or flow wrap product, how can we quickly change the design to help improve the cooling of the produce? And really the tools that we're looking at are data-based modelling techniques. So this allows us to understand very quickly when we make a design change, what impact does that have on the way the fruit is cooled as it moves through the supply chain. So just to show you some of the tools that we now have. So this is at a single box level, and I guess this is our first stage in creating a new design. So the idea is we've developed computer-based modelling, so we could have some equipment that we've built ourselves, which we can screen the boxes very quickly. So as we make design changes, we can understand how does the flow change through the box, and then use that to predict, well, what's the box going to be doing from a temperature perspective in that 1 or 2 weeks as it goes through the supply chain. Supply chain for us also means that we actually go into the farms and look at what the airflows are, what are the temperatures, how's the cooling set up in the cool room. So yeah, is it a static room? Is it directed flow with pressure cooling? What's it doing in the container? And then we use that data to look at the orientation of the boxes through the different axes to measure a given airflow to match a particular customer's room. And then from that we can predict within 24 to 48 hours what the cooling is going to be on the carton. So this is where the speed of design screening comes into play. So if we can do it in 24 hours, we have a much better idea of where we're going to be before we put a box out into the actual market. So the box is one thing. The other part we've looked at is what does the box actually do when it's palletised? Because the pallet is what's moving through the supply chain, not the single box. So the idea here is to have a look at when we make a design change, how does that affect the distribution of the temperature through the pallet? Because ultimately it's the temperature and the evenness of temperature that determines the quality of the produce when it hits the market at the other end. So what this is showing is two different designs, and this is basically a cross-section through a full pallet, and you can see these hot spots in the centre column of the box. So some of the trials we've done, these centre columns can be running 3 times as slow to cool down to the target temperature as the outside of the pallet. So the idea is as we change the ventilation, what does it actually do at a pallet level where you have the box design overlaid with the palletising pattern? So the idea here is if we make the changes, we can look at a simulation for the full pallet before and then a full pallet afterwards. And you can see there's much more uniform cooling and temperature distribution through the pallet. And the benefit of this is that it means that the produce is got down to target temperature quickly, but also more evenly. So it's about consistency of quality through the pallet. Again, some more practical examples of the outcomes. So again, it's showing, if the design's not right, we get hot spots within the pallet. This is a pressure-cooled example. But again, if the ventilation's not optimised, you can see there's sections of the individual carton that are running hot compared to the rest of the carton. So this is a time temperature map, and it's looking at the time taken to get down to a more even target temperature within the carton. So again, we've got visual tools to do the modelling so that when we make a design change, we put it through this simulation and we're able to understand what's the temperature distribution within the carton as it goes through the normal cooling cycle. So, practical examples. So this is, like a before and after shot. So it's one of the test pallets from the centre of a pallet, test boxes from the centre of a pallet. This is clearly showing a hot centre of the fruit within the box, but after making the ventilation changes at a pallet level, we're able to reduce the distribution of the temperature into a much more even temperature within the box. So these are the sort of tools that we're using now to understand what's actually going on rather than just making a box and putting it through a supply chain. This is, the final stage. So we've spoken about single box, we've spoken about pallet, this is container level. So this is an example of one of the trials that we did into Singapore, and it shows, again, the before and after, standard cooling rate with the original design, and then with the new design product. And this is product that was packed at 25 degrees direct into the container. We were able to reduce the cooling half time from about 21 hours down to roughly 13 hours. So if you get it right, you can get a very significant improvement in the cooling rates of the boxes in the container. So what's possible? I guess this is a summary of what we've been able to achieve by using this more detailed analysis and the technical tools that we have. So we've been able to achieve cooling rates of between 10 and 40%. 40% was the best that we've done, but typically we're in the 10 to 20% improvement of cooling, but without compromising the box compression strength. So look, it's easy to improve the ventilation of a box. You just put more vents in it. The downside is you're reducing the top load strength of the box when it's palletised. So really we do these together. We do the cooling improvement, but we also look at the maintenance of the compression strength. As I said, we have better consistency in a given box, but also when the box is palletised. And I think probably the biggest learning that we've had out of this program is that we have been able to see that there is potential to cool in container. So there was, look, to be honest, there's been a lot of scepticism. I guess the established view was that you couldn't do that. We have been able to demonstrate that that is possible. So what that means is you don't necessarily have to hold your produce in the rooms and get it down to your 2 to 5 degrees. You can actually bring it down partially, then put it into the container and then allow the container to do the rest. And we've got data that's been able to demonstrate that. Now really the outcome is we've moved away from just designing a box. It's more about the box tied to the supply chain, and that's really what we're trying to do now, to turn it the other way. Look at the supply chain first, then go away and design the box to suit. So just some final comments, and really to summarise, I guess the key things that we've got out of this project is that Australian produce is definitely recognised as being one of quality and safe product, and the branding and packaging can support that premiumisation and the positioning in the market, which is really the avenue to compete with the likes of the bulk growers like China. In Asia, very clear range of channels to market. So we've got the traditional wholesale market, but there are some very sophisticated DC operations in Asia, and there's also the web sales, which is a very strong trend that we're seeing. So really what that means is you need to understand what is your specific supply chain that your product's going into, and then specify the packaging to suit that supply chain. You know, there are two extremes. There is the modern DC, but there's also the uncontrolled distribution, as you saw, where products going on to loose into unrefrigerated trucks for inland distribution. So how do we deal with that? One way, I guess, is to look at the packaging, but the other way is to say, well, can we compete in this kind of market? Can we maintain our quality? Or are we better off focusing on the people with the DC that are servicing the markets that are paying for the premium product? Because there is two very distinct, I guess, paths that you could consider. And finally, look, there are better technical tools. So there are better techniques now, I think, to optimise the packaging and try and come up, from our perspective, product that's going to support what you're doing to get your produce into specific supply chains. So that's it from me. Before I finish, Jeff, I'd also just like to say that and make some acknowledgements. We've had excellent support from the growers. The growers that I've worked with personally on the farm have been very willing to share their knowledge. I mean, we know boxes, but we don't necessarily understand the up and downstream of the supply chain. And the growers have been very helpful in allowing us to do the room surveys, but also explain what they need from a farm flow to port. And then also some of our exporters have been very generous with their time in taking us into the supply chains in Asia. So specifically, I'd like to thank Agri Exchange. They were the pilot company for the original techniques to prove what we were hoping to come up with. And then also Fresh Produce Group, who helped take us through the supply chains in Asia and help us understand what we needed to do from a packaging perspective. So thank you.